It was a scorching July afternoon when I first realized something was wrong. The sun blazed down on the asphalt as I hurried to our house, a mix of excitement and unease churning in my gut. Just an hour earlier, I had received a call from our lawyer, informing me that a distant uncle, one I barely remembered, had passed away and left us a substantial inheritance. The number he mentioned was staggering, far more than I could have imagined. It was the kind of money that could change our lives forever. I pushed open the front door and found Laura in the kitchen, her back turned to me as she prepared lunch. "Laura," I called out, my voice tinged with excitement, "you won't believe what just happened." She turned around, her green eyes wide with curiosity. "What is it, David?" I quickly explained the situation, watching her expression closely. At first, she seemed as stunned as I was, her hand trembling slightly as she placed the knife on the counter. But then, something shifted in her gaze. It wasn't just surprise or disbelief. There was a spark of something else, something that made my heart skip a beat. It was a look of pure, unfiltered greed. "That's incredible," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you realize what this means, David? We can do anything now." "Anything?" I nodded slowly, though the growing excitement in her voice sent a shiver down my spine. "Yeah, it's a lot of money, but we should be careful with it. Maybe invest in something safe. Pay off the mortgage." But Laura wasn't listening. She was already lost in her own thoughts, her mind racing with possibilities. "We could buy a new house, a mansion, and a new car. No, not just a car, a whole collection of cars. And we could travel, first class, of course, and—" "Laura," I interrupted, trying to bring her back to reality. "Let's not get carried away. We need to think this through." She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly as if I'd just spoken a foreign language. "David, this is our chance to finally live the way we've always dreamed. Why are you hesitating?" I swallowed hard, sensing that this conversation was taking a dangerous turn. "I just don't want us to make any rash decisions. We've been fine up until now without all this money. We should be smart about it." For a moment, she stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she dismissed my concerns. "You worry too much, David. This is a blessing. We deserve this." I forced a smile, but inside, a cold knot of fear had settled in my stomach. Something told me that this money, instead of bringing us closer together, might just tear us apart. The change in Laura was almost immediate. Within days, she had transformed from the loving, down-to-earth wife I knew into someone I barely recognized. She spent hours poring over luxury catalogs, planning out elaborate renovations to our home, and booking appointments with high-end designers. Every conversation seemed to revolve around money, how to spend it, where to invest it, and how to make even more of it. At first, I tried to keep up with her enthusiasm. I accompanied her to meetings with financial advisors and even indulged in some of her more extravagant ideas, like redecorating the living room with imported Italian furniture. But the more she pushed, the more uncomfortable I became. It was as if the money had unlocked something in her, something that had been lying dormant all these years. One evening, about a week after the windfall, Laura came home late from a charity event she had attended in the city. I was in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV, when she walked in. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a dress I had never seen before, elegant, expensive, and entirely out of place in our modest home. "Hey," I greeted her, my eyes lingering on the dress. "You look different." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Do you like it? I bought it this afternoon. It's a designer piece, very exclusive." I nodded, though I couldn't help but wonder how much it had cost. "It's nice, but do we really need more clothes? You've been shopping a lot lately." Her smile faltered, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of annoyance in her expression. "David, we can afford it now. Why shouldn't I treat myself?" I sighed, sensing this was going to be another argument I couldn't win. I just think we should be careful, that's all. She didn't reply. Instead, she grabbed a glass of wine from the kitchen and settled into the armchair opposite me. We sat in silence, the tension between us growing thicker by the minute. A few days later, I noticed she had started keeping her phone on silent, tucking it away whenever I was around. She was more secretive, spending hours away from home without any clear explanation. When I asked her about it, she brushed off my concerns with vague excuses: meetings with advisors, shopping trips, charity work. But something didn't add up. The final straw came when I ran into her at that restaurant. I had been running errands in the city and decided to grab a quick bite to eat. As I walked into the restaurant, my eyes were immediately drawn to a familiar figure at one of the corner tables. It was Laura, dressed to the nines, laughing and sipping wine with a man I didn't recognize. They were sitting close, too close. She leaned in, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her expression one of playful flirtation. My stomach twisted in knots as I watched them, my heart pounding in my chest. I left the restaurant without confronting her, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had just seen. The Laura I knew would never do this, would never betray me like this. But the Laura I knew had disappeared, replaced by someone I could no longer trust. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, pretending to be asleep, I knew one thing for sure: our marriage was in serious trouble, and I had no idea how to fix it. The day after I saw Laura at the restaurant, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting with that man, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. It ate at me, gnawing away at whatever trust I had left. That evening, as Laura prepared dinner, I knew I had to confront her. The air in the kitchen was thick with the aroma of garlic and herbs, but I couldn't taste anything. All I could focus on was the knot in my stomach and the fear of what I might discover. "Laura," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk?" She glanced over her shoulder, her smile fading when she saw the serious look on my face. "Sure, what's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pound in my chest. "I saw you yesterday. At that restaurant in the city. You were with a man I didn't recognize." For a moment, she froze, her hand hovering over the cutting board. Then, slowly, she turned to face me, her expression carefully neutral. "Oh, that was Greg, a business associate. We were discussing some potential investments." "Really?" I asked, my voice tinged with skepticism. It didn't look like a business meeting. It looked personal. Her eyes narrowed, a flash of anger crossing her face. "What are you implying, David? That I'm cheating on you?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know, Laura. But something doesn't feel right. You've been different lately, distant. And now I see you with this guy, acting like you're more than just business associates." She dropped the knife onto the counter, her hands trembling slightly. "I can't believe you're accusing me of this. Greg is helping us manage our money, David. He's been a godsend, and you're turning it into something dirty." I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "I'm not turning it into anything. I just want the truth, Laura." "Are you having an affair with him?" There was a long pause as she stared at me, her eyes searching mine. Finally, she shook her head, letting out a bitter laugh. "No, David, I'm not having an affair. But I'm insulted that you'd even think that." Her denial did little to ease the growing pit of unease in my stomach, but I didn't press further. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe I was just paranoid. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something from me. We finished dinner in silence, the tension between us palpable. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and suspicion. Laura continued to disappear for hours at a time, her explanations growing vaguer with each passing day. I found myself obsessing over her every move, questioning everything she said and did. It got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, something concrete to either confirm my fears or put them to rest. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. The decision didn't come easy. It felt like a betrayal of the trust that had once been the foundation of our marriage. But that trust was already shattered. And I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Kate, promised to be discreet. She assured me that she would get to the bottom of whatever was going on, and within a week, she had her answer. The report came in a plain brown envelope, unmarked and unremarkable, yet it felt like it weighed a ton as I held it in my hands. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. As I read through the details, my worst fears were confirmed. Laura was having an affair. The man she had been meeting was indeed Greg, a wealthy real estate mogul. They had been seeing each other for months, long before we had come into the money. Kate had followed them to several meetings, each one more intimate than the last, and there were photos, undeniable evidence of her betrayal. I sat there in stunned silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. How could she do this? How could she throw away everything we had built together for the sake of a quick thrill and more money? That night, I confronted her again, this time with the evidence in hand. Laura's face went pale as I showed her the photos, her eyes wide with fear. "I know everything, Laura," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I know about you and Greg." She didn't deny it this time. Instead, she crumpled onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, David. I didn't want you to find out like this." "Why, Laura?" I demanded, my anger finally boiling over. "Why would you do this? We had everything we needed. Why wasn't that enough for you?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't just about the money, David. It was about the thrill, the excitement. Greg made me feel alive in a way that I haven't felt in years. I got caught up in it, and I made a terrible mistake." "A mistake?" I spat, my hands trembling with rage. "You didn't just make a mistake, Laura. You destroyed our marriage. You risked everything we had for what? A few cheap thrills?" She sobbed, reaching out to me, but I recoiled. "I know I messed up. But I swear, it's over. I'll cut all ties with Greg, and we can fix this. We can start over." But I wasn't sure if we could. The damage was done, and I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And as much as I wanted to believe her, as much as I wanted to fix things, a part of me knew that this was the beginning of the end. The days following Laura's confession were some of the darkest I'd ever experienced. Our once warm and loving home felt like a battlefield, every conversation a landmine waiting to explode. We avoided each other, both of us knowing that the next fight was just around the corner. But the worst was yet to come. A week after I confronted Laura with the evidence, I found myself in a meeting with my lawyer. I had started the process of protecting my share of the money, thinking that if things didn't work out between us, I wouldn't be left with nothing. My lawyer, a sharp and pragmatic man, had suggested freezing our joint accounts until we could figure out our next steps. As I sat across from him, discussing the details, he paused, his brow furrowing as he reviewed some documents. "David," he said slowly, "there's something you should see." He slid a stack of papers across the desk, and I glanced down, my heart sinking as I recognized the familiar signatures. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. "It's a series of large transfers," he explained. "It looks like Laura has been moving significant sums of money out of your joint accounts into a separate account in her name. The first transfer happened right after you received the inheritance, and there have been several more since then." I stared at the numbers, the reality of what I was seeing sinking in like a knife to the gut. Laura hadn't just been unfaithful. She had been siphoning off our money, funneling it into an account I had no access to. My stomach churned as the betrayal deepened. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can act quickly to freeze what's left," my lawyer said. but I'm afraid a significant portion is already gone. I'd suggest filing for divorce immediately and seeking a court order to prevent her from accessing any more funds. I nodded numbly, barely processing his words. Laura had betrayed me in ways I hadn't even imagined, and now I was faced with the possibility that she had risked our entire future for her own gain. That night, I confronted her for what felt like the 100th time. But this time, there was no shouting, no anger, just a deep, simmering hurt that made my voice tremble as I spoke. Laura, I said, my voice strained, I know about the money. I know you've been transferring it to a separate account. Why? She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she met my gaze with a steely resolve I hadn't seen before. David, I was doing what I had to do. Greg promised me he could double our money if I invested with him. It was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. I shook my head in disbelief. And you didn't think to tell me? You just went behind my back and risked everything? For what, more money? Isn't the fortune we already have enough for you? It wasn't about the amount, she shot back, her voice rising. It was about the future, our future. Greg said this investment could set us up for life, and I believed him. I did it for us, David. For us? I repeated, incredulous. You call this betrayal doing it for us? You've been lying to me, stealing from me, all for a gamble that might not even pay off. Laura's expression hardened. I did what I had to do. You don't understand the kind of opportunities we had with Greg's connections. I wasn't going to let it slip through our fingers. My heart ached as I looked at the woman I had once loved with all my heart, now a stranger standing before me. And what if it doesn't work out, Laura? What if you've lost everything? She hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. It will work out, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of our broken marriage pressing down on me. I can't do this anymore, Laura. I can't live with someone who would betray me like this. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm freezing our accounts. You won't take another penny from me. She didn't fight back, didn't argue or beg. She simply nodded, as if she had expected this outcome all along. And in that moment, I knew there was nothing left to salvage. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal documents, tense meetings, and cold, silent nights. Laura and I still lived under the same roof, but we were more like strangers than ever before. The house felt empty, filled with echoes of the love we once shared but could no longer find. The divorce process moved quickly. With the evidence of Laura's affair and her financial betrayal, my lawyer assured me that I had a strong case. We filed the papers and initiated the process of dividing our assets, though there wasn't much left to divide. The money Laura had transferred was mostly gone, sunk into Greg's real estate scheme, which was now unraveling as a scam. Laura's face grew more drawn and weary with each passing day, the reality of her decisions weighing heavily on her. I watched as the confident, determined woman who had once stood by my side crumbled under the pressure of her own mistakes. But as much as I pitied her, I couldn't find it in myself to forgive her. One afternoon, as I was packing up my things to move out, she approached me. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked more fragile than I had ever seen her. David, she said quietly, I'm sorry. I know I've ruined everything. I was so caught up in the money, in what I thought it could bring us, that I lost sight of what really mattered. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm truly sorry. I paused, my hands gripping the edge of the box I was filling. Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret and sorrow. Part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to tell her that we could somehow fix this. But the damage was too great, the betrayal too deep. I appreciate that, Laura, I said, my voice calm but distant. But it doesn't change what happened. You made your choices. And now we have to live with the consequences. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know. I just wanted to say it. I'm sorry. I finished packing in silence, the weight of our failed marriage pressing down on both of us. As I loaded the last box into my car, I turned to her one last time. "Goodbye, Laura." "Goodbye, David," she whispered, her voice breaking. I drove away, leaving behind the house that had once been filled with so much love and hope. My heart ached with the loss of what could have been. But I knew I had made the right choice. There was no going back, no undoing the damage that had been done. As I pulled onto the highway, the city fading into the distance behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief. The future was uncertain, and the road ahead was long, but at least I was free from the lies, the deceit, and the pain that had consumed my life. It was time to start over, to rebuild my life from the ground up. And as painful as it was to leave everything behind, I knew that it was the only way forward. The first few weeks after leaving Laura were some of the loneliest I'd ever experienced. I moved into a small apartment downtown, a far cry from the house we had shared. The walls were bare, the rooms sparsely furnished, but it was a fresh start, a place where I could begin to heal from the wounds of our marriage. My days were filled with mundane tasks: work, grocery shopping, and the occasional dinner with friends who knew better than to ask too many questions. At night, though, the silence of the apartment weighed on me. I found myself replaying everything that had happened, searching for where it all went wrong. Had there been signs that I missed? Could I have done something differently to save our marriage? The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to Laura's cooperation. She didn't contest the terms, perhaps knowing that there was little point in dragging it out. The settlement wasn't much, a fraction of what we once had, but I was relieved to be free of the legal entanglements. Laura moved out of our house shortly after the divorce was finalized, selling it and taking whatever was left of her share. I heard through mutual friends that she had cut ties with Greg, who was now facing legal trouble for his fraudulent schemes. She was reportedly trying to rebuild her life, much like I was, but we never spoke again. Whatever we once had was gone, replaced by the cold, hard reality of our choices. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, nursing a drink and watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I found myself thinking about the future. I had spent so much time dwelling on the past, on what Laura and I had lost, that I hadn't really considered what came next. A part of me wanted to shut myself off from the world, to retreat into the safety of my own solitude. But I knew that wasn't the answer. Life had to go on, and I couldn't let the pain of the past define me. I had to find a way to move forward, to rebuild my life on my own terms. The next day, I made a decision. I would focus on myself, on my own happiness. I would rediscover who I was outside of my marriage. Outside of the betrayal that had consumed me for so long. And most importantly, I would learn to trust again, even if it took time. Months passed, and slowly, I began to rebuild my life. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects and challenges that kept me busy and focused. I reconnected with old friends, rekindling relationships that had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. And I started taking better care of myself, physically and mentally, determined to emerge from this ordeal stronger than before. One day, while on a business trip to San Francisco, I met someone who would change everything. Her name was Rachel, a colleague from another company we were collaborating with on a major project. From the moment we were introduced, there was an easy connection between us. She was smart, driven, and had a sense of humor that caught me off guard in the best way possible. At first, I was hesitant to let her in. I wasn't sure if I was ready to open my heart again, not after everything that had happened with Laura. But Rachel was patient. We started off as friends, grabbing coffee after meetings and talking about everything from work to life in general. There was no pressure, no rush, just a genuine connection that grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't long before I realized that I was falling for her. But this time, it was different. There were no secrets, no hidden agendas, just two people getting to know each other, one day at a time. Rachel knew about my past, about the divorce, and she never judged me for it. Instead, she listened, offering support without trying to fix things or make them go away. One evening, after a long day of meetings, we found ourselves sitting on a bench overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, the city lights twinkling in the distance. We were talking about nothing in particular, just enjoying each other's company, when she turned to me, her expression serious.
"David," she said softly, "I know you've been through a lot. And I don't want to rush you into anything you're not ready for.
But I just want you to know that I'm here, and I care about you.
Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out together."
Her words hit me like a wave, overwhelming in their simplicity and sincerity. For so long, I had been so focused on the pain of my past that I hadn't allowed myself to see the possibilities of the future. But sitting there with Rachel, I realized that I didn't have to do this alone.
I could take a chance on happiness again, even if it meant risking my heart. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. "Thank you, Rachel," I said, my voice thick with emotion.
"I care about you too.
And I want to see where this goes, together." She smiled a warm, genuine smile that made my heart feel lighter than it had in a long time.
We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the lights dance on the water, the future suddenly looking a little brighter.
As the weeks turned into months, Rachel and I grew closer. Our relationship wasn't perfect. No relationship is, but it was honest and built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect.
She helped me heal in ways I hadn't thought possible, showing me that it was okay to love again, to be vulnerable, and to take risks.
Looking back, I realized that everything I had gone through with Laura had led me to this moment.
It hadn't been easy, and there were times when I thought I'd never recover from the pain of betrayal. But life has a way of surprising you, of offering second chances when you least expect them. As I stood on the brink of a new chapter in my life, I knew one thing for certain.
I wasn't defined by my past, by the mistakes, or the heartbreak. I was defined by how I chose to move forward, by the strength I found in myself and in those who cared about me. Rachel was a part of that new beginning, but so was I. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future, excited to see where life would take me next. And as I looked into Rachel's eyes, I knew that whatever came our way, we would face it together, one step at a time. Things were going well between Rachel and me. Our relationship had deepened into something meaningful, something real.
We had started spending weekends together, exploring the city, trying new restaurants, and even talking about taking a trip abroad.
For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely happy, like I had finally found someone I could build a future with.
But just as I was beginning to think that the past was behind me, it found a way to claw its way back into my life. One evening, as Rachel and I were preparing dinner together in my apartment, my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced at it, expecting it to be a work email or a message from a friend, but when I saw the name on the screen, my blood ran cold. It was a text from Laura.
"David, I need to talk to you. Please, it's important." I stared at the message, my mind racing. I hadn't heard from Laura since the divorce was finalized, and I had no desire to reopen old wounds. But the urgency in her words made me hesitate.
What could she possibly want now? Why reach out after all this time? Rachel must have noticed the change in my demeanor because she looked over, concern etched on her face. "Everything okay?"
I forced a smile, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest.
"Yeah, just a message from an old friend."
She nodded, accepting my answer without prying further, but I could tell she sensed something was off. Later that night, after Rachel had gone home, I sat on the edge of my bed,
staring at the message. I knew I should ignore it, that responding would only drag me back into the chaos I had worked so hard to escape. But something in the back of my mind whispered that there might be unfinished business, something I needed to confront once and for all. Against my better judgment, I texted back, "What do you want, Laura?"
Her reply came quickly, "Can we meet?"
"It's about the money and Greg."
"I'm in trouble, David." I didn't know who else to turn to. I let out a long, frustrated sigh. The last thing I wanted was to get involved in Laura's problems, especially if they involved Greg.
But a part of me still felt a sense of responsibility. After all, we had once shared a life together, and despite everything, I couldn't just ignore her plea for help.
The next day, I met Laura at a small cafe on the outskirts of town.
She looked different, thinner, more worn out, like the weight of her decisions had finally caught up with her.
She glanced up as I approached, offering a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes.
"Thank you for coming, David," she said, her voice trembling slightly.
I nodded, taking a seat across from her. "You said you were in trouble.
"What's going on?"
She took a deep breath, wringing her hands nervously. "It's Greg.
He's not what I thought he was. After the divorce, I invested the money I had left with him, thinking it would help me get back on my feet.
But it turns out, it was all a scam. He's been siphoning money from his investors, and now the authorities are closing in on him."
I frowned, a mix of anger and pity swirling in my chest.
"And you didn't see this coming, Laura?"
"After everything, you still trusted him?"
She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was desperate, David.
I didn't know what else to do.
And now I'm being investigated too.
They think I was in on it, that I helped him steal the money."
I could lose everything. I sat back, trying to process what she was telling me. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it.
"What do you expect me to do, Laura?"
"I'm not sure how I can help you." She looked at me with pleading eyes. "I need you to talk to the investigators.
"Tell them that I didn't know what Greg was doing, that I was a victim too. They might listen to you."
I shook my head, the anger bubbling up again.
"You want me to lie for you? After everything you've done?"
"I'm sorry, Laura, but I can't do that."
Tears streamed down her face as she reached out, gripping my hand tightly.
"Please, David.
I know I don't deserve your help.
But I'm begging you. I don't know what else to do." I pulled my hand away, standing up from the table. "I'm sorry, Laura. I can't get involved in this."
You made your choices, and now you have to deal with the consequences." She sobbed quietly as I turned to leave, the weight of our broken relationship hanging heavy in the air. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow.
I had finally closed the door on that chapter of my life, but it had come at a cost I wasn't sure I was ready to pay. In the days following my meeting with Laura, I tried to focus on the present, on my relationship with Rachel and the life I was building without the baggage of my past.
But the encounter with Laura lingered in the back of my mind, a nagging reminder of how quickly things could fall apart.
Rachel noticed my distraction, of course.
One evening, as we were sitting on my balcony, watching the sunset over the city, she finally brought it up.
"You've been distant lately," she said, her voice gentle but firm.
"Is everything okay?"
I sighed, knowing I couldn't keep it from her any longer. "I met with Laura a few days ago. She reached out and said she was in trouble with the authorities because of Greg.
She asked for my help, but I told her I couldn't get involved."
Rachel listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. "That must have been hard for you." "It was," I admitted.
"But it also felt like something I needed to do.
I had to close that chapter of my life for good. I don't want her, or anything to do with her, hanging over us." She nodded, her hand resting on mine. "I understand. And I'm proud of you for standing your ground."
You've come a long way, David."
Her words brought a small smile to my face. "Thanks, Rachel. I just want to focus on us now, on the future.
I don't want to let the past dictate what happens next."
Rachel leaned in, kissing me softly. "We'll build our own future, one step at a time. No more looking back, just forward."
As we sat there together, I felt a sense of peace settle over me.
For the first time in a long time, I wasn't haunted by the mistakes of the past or the fear of what might happen next.
I had found someone who accepted me for who I was, scars and all, and I was determined to make the most of this second chance at happiness. The next few months were a period of growth and healing. Rachel and I took that trip we had talked about, exploring the vibrant streets of Paris and the rolling hills of Tuscany.
We shared laughs, made new memories, and deepened our connection in ways I hadn't thought possible.
Every day with her felt like a step closer to the life I had always wanted but had been too afraid to pursue.
Back home, I finally decided to sell the apartment I had moved into after leaving Laura. It held too many memories, too much of the past I was trying to move on from.
Rachel and I began searching for a new place, somewhere we could start fresh, and build a life together without the shadows of my old one. One afternoon, as we were touring a charming townhouse in a quiet neighborhood,
Rachel turned to me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "What do you think, David? Could this be our new home?" I looked around, taking in the warm, inviting space, the kind of place where we could build a future, where laughter and love could fill the rooms. For the first time in a long time, I felt a deep sense of contentment, a certainty that this was where I was meant to be. "I think it's perfect," I said, smiling at her. "Let's make it ours." As we signed the papers and made plans for our move, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come.
The journey had been long and painful, filled with heartbreak and betrayal, but it had led me to a place of healing and hope.
I had learned that it was possible to rebuild, to find love again even after the deepest of wounds.
Rachel and I settled into our new home, filling it with laughter, love, and the promise of a future built on trust and mutual respect. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I realized that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along: peace,
happiness, and the strength to move forward without looking back. Life with Rachel was everything I'd hoped for and more.
We settled into our new home, and it quickly became a sanctuary filled with warmth and love. Each day felt like a gift, a reminder of how far I'd come and how much I had to look forward to. But just when I thought the past was finally behind me, it found a way to intrude once more.
It was a Saturday afternoon, and Rachel and I were enjoying a lazy day at home. She was in the kitchen, preparing lunch, while I lounged on the couch, flipping through a magazine. The sound of a knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "I'll get it," I called out to Rachel as I stood up, feeling a slight unease.
We weren't expecting anyone, and most of our friends knew to call before dropping by.
As I approached the door, a nagging feeling gnawed at the back of my mind. I opened the door, and there stood a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, well-dressed, with a serious expression that set me on edge.
He held out a badge, identifying himself as a federal investigator. "David, I presume?"
he asked, his tone professional but firm. I nodded, my heart beginning to race. "Yes, that's me. What's this about?" The investigator's gaze was steady as he spoke. "I'm here regarding Laura.
We're conducting an investigation into Greg's financial activities, and it seems that Laura has been more involved than she initially let on.
We have reason to believe she might have used your previous accounts and financial assets to cover her tracks.
We'd like to ask you a few questions."
My stomach dropped. Laura had already turned my life upside down once. Now it seemed she was about to do it again. I motioned for the investigator to step inside, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course. Come in."
Rachel appeared in the doorway, a concerned look on her face as she saw the stranger in our home.
"What's going on?" I quickly explained the situation, and her expression shifted from concern to support. She sat beside me on the couch as the investigator took a seat across from us. The next hour was grueling.
The investigator asked about my financial history, about my relationship with Laura during the time Greg was active, and about any communications I'd had with her since the divorce. I answered honestly, but the tension in the room was palpable. Finally, the investigator closed his notebook, his expression softening slightly.
"I appreciate your cooperation, David. This is a complicated case, and we're trying to get to the bottom of it. If you remember anything else that might be relevant, please don't hesitate to contact us." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety as he left. Rachel squeezed my hand, her touch grounding me in the moment.
"We'll get through this," she said softly.
"Whatever happens, we'll face it together." I smiled weakly, grateful for her support, but the weight of the past was heavy on my shoulders. I thought I had moved on, that I had left all of this behind. But now it seemed that Laura's choices were still haunting me, threatening to unravel the life I had worked so hard to rebuild. Over the next few days, the tension lingered between us. Rachel tried to reassure me, but I could tell that the investigation had shaken her too. I couldn't blame her. Our relationship had been built on a foundation of trust, and now the past was creeping in, threatening to destabilize everything we had worked for.
One evening, after a particularly stressful day, I found myself sitting alone in our bedroom, staring out the window at the darkening sky.
I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. What if the investigation uncovered something that implicated me? What if Laura's actions dragged me down with her? Rachel walked in, her expression filled with concern. She sat beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "David, talk to me."
"I can see this is eating you up inside."
I sighed, leaning back against the headboard. I just keep thinking about everything that could go wrong.
What if they find something that links me to Laura's schemes?
What if it ruins everything we've built? Rachel was silent for a moment, then she took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "We'll face whatever comes our way, David. I know you. You're a good man, and you didn't do anything wrong. Laura made her choices, and they don't define you."
Her words were comforting, but I still felt a gnawing sense of responsibility.
"I just hate that she's still a part of our lives, even after everything."
"I want to move on, but it feels like I'm being pulled back into the past."
Rachel nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I know it's hard, but you can't let this define you.
We've come too far to let the past destroy our future.
Whatever happens, we'll deal with it together." Her unwavering support gave me the strength I needed to push through the uncertainty. I knew that I couldn't control what the investigation might uncover, but I could control how I responded to it. I had built a life with Rachel, a life that was worth fighting for.
The next day, I decided to confront the situation head-on.
I contacted the investigator and offered to provide any additional information they needed. I wanted to clear my name and close this chapter of my life once and for all.
In the weeks that followed, the investigation continued, but the intensity of the situation began to fade. The investigator thanked me for my cooperation and assured me that I was not a suspect.
It seemed that Laura's involvement had been more extensive than anyone realized, but there was no evidence linking me to her crimes.
When I shared the news with Rachel, I could see the relief in her eyes.
We had weathered the storm together, and it had only strengthened our bond.
One evening, as we sat on our porch, watching the sunset, I turned to Rachel and took her hand.
"I want to put all of this behind us," I said softly. "I'm done letting the past control our future." She smiled, her eyes filled with love and understanding. "Then let's do it. Let's focus on the life we're building together, the life we deserve."
As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace wash over me.
The shadows of the past were finally fading. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.
Free to love, free to live, and free to embrace the future with Rachel by my side.
Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that we would face them together, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to build a life that was truly our own. With the investigation behind us, Rachel and I were finally able to focus on the life we had been dreaming of. The dark clouds of the past had cleared, and in their place was a bright future full of possibilities. We threw ourselves into making our house a home.
Every weekend was spent picking out furniture, painting walls, and adding little touches that made the place uniquely ours. Rachel had an eye for design, and it wasn't long before our townhouse became a warm, inviting space where we both felt at peace. One Saturday, as we were unpacking a box of framed photos, Rachel paused, holding up a picture of the two of us from our trip to Paris.
The Eiffel Tower stood tall in the background, and we were both laughing, caught in a moment of pure happiness.
"This is my favorite," she said, smiling as she placed it on the mantel.
"It reminds me of how far we've come." I looked at the photo and then at Rachel, feeling a deep swell of gratitude. "We've built something beautiful together, Rachel." I'm so glad we found each other. She wrapped her arms around me, her head resting against my chest. Me too, David. I can't imagine my life without you. As we stood there, holding each other, I realized that I had finally found the peace I had been searching for.
The chaos of the past was behind me, and in its place was a life filled with love, trust, and a sense of belonging. That night, after we had finished decorating, we sat on the couch with a bottle of wine, toasting our new beginning. The worries that had once plagued me felt like a distant memory, replaced by the joy of building a future with someone who truly understood and loved me.
Over the next few weeks, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. We both had our routines, work during the day, evenings spent together, and weekends filled with adventures. It was the kind of life I had always wanted but had never quite managed to achieve before.
One evening, as we were cooking dinner together, Rachel turned to me with a thoughtful look on her face. "David, I've been thinking. What do you think about starting a family?" The question caught me off guard, but in a good way.
I had always wanted children, but with everything that had happened with Laura, it hadn't seemed like a possibility.
Now, with Rachel, the idea felt right, like the next natural step in our journey together.
I'd love that, I said, smiling at her. I think we'd make great parents. Her face lit up with joy, and she hugged me tightly. I think so too.
Let's start planning for the future, our future. As we talked about what our lives might look like with children, I felt a sense of excitement and anticipation that I hadn't felt in a long time. The thought of building a family with Rachel, of creating a life filled with love and laughter, was everything I had ever wanted. That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. The future was bright, and I knew that with Rachel by my side, anything was possible.
Life had never been better.
Rachel and I were closer than ever, and the idea of starting a family had given us a new sense of purpose.
We began making plans, researching schools in the area, talking about what kind of parents we wanted to be, and even picking out names for our future children.
But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, the past found a way to knock on our door once again. It was a rainy evening, and Rachel and I were curled up on the couch, watching a movie. The sound of the rain against the windows was soothing, and I felt a sense of calm that had become the norm in our lives. Then, there was a knock at the door. I glanced at Rachel, who gave me a puzzled look. "Are we expecting anyone?"
"No," I said, getting up from the couch. "I'll see who it is." When I opened the door, I was met with a sight that took me completely by surprise. Standing there, drenched in the rain, was Laura. She looked disheveled, her clothes soaked through, and there was a wild, desperate look in her eyes. "David, I need your help," she said, her voice trembling. I stared at her, my mind racing. After everything that had happened, after all the pain and chaos she had caused, I had never expected to see her again, especially not like this. "What are you doing here, Laura?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced over her shoulder, as if afraid someone might be following her, before turning back to me. "I didn't know where else to go. Greg's in prison, and the people he owed money to, they're coming after me. I'm scared, David. I don't know what to do." Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to tell her that she was no longer my problem. But another part of me, the part that had once loved her, the part that still felt some residual sense of responsibility, kept me rooted in place. Rachel appeared behind me, her expression a mix of concern and confusion. "David, who is it?" I turned to her, unsure of how to explain the situation. It's Laura. She's in trouble." Rachel's eyes widened, and she looked from me to Laura, clearly trying to process what was happening. "What does she want?" "She says she needs help," I said, my voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't know what to do." Rachel was silent for a moment, then she took a deep breath, her expression hardening slightly. "David, this is your decision. But whatever you decide, I'm here for you." I looked back at Laura, who was shivering from the cold and rain, her eyes pleading with me. I knew that letting her in could bring chaos back into our lives, but I also knew that turning her away could mean leaving her to face whatever dangers awaited her alone.
After a long, tense moment, I stepped aside, opening the door wider.
"Come in, Laura. Let's talk." Rachel's hand tightened around mine, a silent reminder that we were in this together.
As Laura stepped inside, dripping water onto the floor, I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a mistake, if I was inviting trouble back into our lives. But as I looked at Rachel, I knew that whatever happened next, we would face it together.
We had built something strong, something real, and I wasn't going to let the past destroy it.
As we sat down with Laura, ready to hear her out, I braced myself for whatever was to come.
The future I had fought so hard to build was on the line.
But this time, I wasn't alone.
Rachel and I would face this new challenge as a team,
and no matter what, I was determined to protect the life we had created together. As Laura sat down at our kitchen table, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rachel stood beside me, her presence a steadying force as I faced the woman who had once been my wife and now brought nothing but chaos to my doorstep.
Laura's eyes darted around the room as if she couldn't quite believe where she was.
Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the cup of tea Rachel had offered her, but she hadn't taken a sip. Instead, she stared down into the cup, her voice small and unsteady when she finally spoke.
"I'm sorry to show up like this, David," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I didn't have anywhere else to go." I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. "You made your choices, Laura. And those choices led us to where we are now."
"What exactly do you expect me to do?"
She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation.
"Greg's debts, they're coming after me to collect. I don't have the money to pay them off, and I'm scared, David. I'm really scared."
"I thought maybe you could help me, just this one last time."
Rachel's hand found mine, her grip a silent reminder that I didn't have to face this alone.
I looked at Laura, struggling to reconcile the woman in front of me with the person I had once loved. So much had changed.
And the life I had built with Rachel felt worlds away from the one I had shared with Laura.
"I don't owe you anything, Laura," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "You betrayed me, you lied to me, and you left me to pick up the pieces.
And now you're back because you need something from me?"
Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head.
"I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm begging you, David."
I don't have anywhere else to turn. I could feel Rachel's gaze on me,
and I knew she was waiting to see what I would do.
This wasn't just about Laura. It was about us, about the life we had worked so hard to build.
I knew that whatever choice I made would have consequences, not just for me, but for Rachel and our future together.
Taking a deep breath, I looked Laura in the eye.
"I'll give you enough money to get out of town and start over, but that's it. After that, I don't want to hear from you again."
"You need to take responsibility for your own life, Laura. I'm not your safety net anymore." Her expression shifted from desperation to relief.
And she nodded quickly.
"Thank you, David."
"Thank you so much. I promise I'll leave and never bother you again."
I turned to Rachel, searching her face for any sign of doubt or resentment. But all I saw was understanding and support. She trusted me to make the right decision, and that meant more to me than anything. "I'll get you the money," I said to Laura, my tone final. "But after this, you're on your own." She nodded again, wiping away the tears that had begun to fall. "I understand. Thank you." Rachel and I watched as Laura left our home for what I hoped would be the last time. I handed her a small envelope with the money, watching as she walked away, disappearing into the night. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside damp and quiet. As I closed the door, I turned to Rachel, unsure of what to say.
But before I could speak, she wrapped her arms around me, holding me close. "You did the right thing," she whispered.
"You gave her a chance to start over, but you also stood your ground." "I'm proud of you, David." I hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of the past finally begin to lift.
"I couldn't have done it without you, Rachel. You've been my rock through all of this.
We stood there in the quiet of our home, holding each other,
The storm finally behind us.
I knew that the future would bring its own challenges, but I was ready to face them with Rachel by my side.
As we went to bed that night, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in years.
The past was finally where it belonged, behind us.
And as I lay beside Rachel, I knew that the life we were building together was stronger than anything that had come before.
Laura was gone, and with her, the last remnants of the life I had once known.
What lay ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt truly free to embrace the future with the woman I loved.
And that, I realized, was all I had ever wanted.
A life filled with love, trust, and the promise of new beginnings.